Welcome to Reformed Thinking. And you found the deep dive, our space where we really try to get into some significant material. Today we are taking a deep dive into John Calvin's commentary on Psalm 12. As we look at this ancient text, our goal, our mission really is pretty straightforward. We want to grasp David's lament, his sorrow over this widespread societal decay he sees, and then his earnest plea for God's help, and finally, God's steady declaration of rescue. It's a message that, well, it really speaks to many of the challenges we see around us, even now.
That's right. Psalm 12, when you look at it through Calvin's perspective, it vividly portrays David's cry. He's in the middle of this deep moral decay oppression. And then it shifts quite powerfully into this declaration of God's unchanging character and, well, what God has promised. The relevance for believers today, living in times marked by similar, societal corruption, it's quite clear. It gives us a sort of framework for understanding and responding to times like these.
Before we jump right into the heart of David's lament itself, let's just touch on the superscription of Psalm 12. It says, "To the chief musician upon the eighth, a song of David." Now, this chief musician, Calvin's commentary doesn't really detail who this was or their specific role.
Yeah.
There isn't much specific information available, and Calvin doesn't really spend time on it. It seems like, for Calvin, the focus stays really firmly on the meaning, the message of the psalm itself, not so much the technical historical footnotes.
Precisely. Yeah, he doesn't get bogged down in that. And about the eighth, well, there are these two interpretations floating around. Some scholars think it refers to a musical instrument. Others lean towards it indicating a tune, maybe a specific way of singing. Calvin himself notes that the choice between these views is, and this is his phrase, of no great significance.
Right. Doesn't really change the core message.
Exactly. His leaning is that it probably refers to how the psalm was meant to be sung, like a direction for worship. And what this tells us about Calvin's approach, I think, is that he really prioritizes the theological substance, the practical application of Scripture. If a detail doesn't directly help us understand God or how we should live, he often just marks it as secondary. He wants to get to the central truths.
And that perspective, that interpretive stance, it really helps set the stage for what is an urgent cry from David, a desperate one even. He's not just, writing poetry here. He's putting himself in his plea right in the middle of immense human distress, a world that feels like it's falling apart. So David kicks off this psalm by painting a scene of, well, truly dire circumstances. He talks about a wretched and forlorn condition and the utter overthrow of good order among his own people. It's a really striking picture of society just unraveling, not somewhere far away, but right there in his community.
And Calvin really focuses on the specific elements of this moral decay. David sees the merciful man vanishing, the faithful individuals disappearing. Calvin interprets this pretty bluntly. He says it means no longer any beneficence or truth remaining among men.
Wow, that's stark.
It is. It's not just that, a few good people are hard to find. It's a systemic absence. The very practice of righteousness, of justice, the things that should hold society together, it's just stopped. That points to a really profound spiritual and moral decline affecting the whole social body. Imagine a society where kindness, honest dealings, they just aren't happening anymore. That's the kind of decay David's describing, seen through Calvin's eyes.
Calvin, in his commentary, he breaks down this unrighteousness into two distinct types, violence and deceit. He explains that real righteousness means, holding back from doing wrong, from causing injury, and instead cultivating peace, mutual friendship. He uses this really vivid image, saying people should be neither lions nor foxes.
I remember that.
What he means is they should avoid both the obvious aggressive harm, like a lion attacking, and also the sneaky deception, the hidden malice, like a fox. The absence of these qualities, this failure to avoid harm and seek peace, that's what defines the corruption David sees. It's a society where people are either openly dangerous or, well, secretly treacherous, or maybe both.
And from that general state of moral collapse, David's lament then zooms in on something really specific, the pervasive nature of deceit and falsehood in speech. David says, "Everyone speaketh deceit or falsehood with his neighbor. They speak with lips of flattery, with a double heart." That line, it really captures how insidious this is, how deeply personal the problem feels. It's not just about big public lies. It's the everyday dishonesty that eats away at trust right at the foundation of human relationships.
That idea of the double heart is particularly, well, unsettling. Calvin calls it the fountain and first cause of deceit and flattery. When you think about that, how does this internal duplicity, this being sort of hidden within their own breasts, become so corrosive, not just for one person, but for a whole society?
Oh, it's absolutely central. A double heart means people are double and variable in their speech. Their words just aren't reliable. They're inconsistent, untrustworthy, because they aren't coming from a place of genuineness. It lets them disguise themselves, appear different from how they really feel. They keep part of their true intentions hidden, as you said, within their own breasts, and cover it all up with the varnish of hypocrisy and a fair outside.
Like a mask.
Exactly. And this isn't just about the occasional white lie. Calvin sees it as a foundational spiritual disorder. Our internal truth doesn't match our external presentation. It's a complete lack of sincerity. Think about it. If sincere speech is supposed to be like a mirror in which the uprightness of our heart may be beheld,
Right.
then a double heart just shatters that mirror. It reflects only distortion, fakeness. It's a breakdown of trust, not just with other people, but ultimately with God, because a heart that's divided can't fully serve truth. It really makes you think about how much of, say, modern public discourse, politics, advertising, you name it, might operate from this very double-hearted place where the outward show obscures the real motives.
Hmm.
And interestingly, the Hebrew word for flattery, chalakoth, it's even linked to the idea of division. It reinforces this notion of hidden feelings, a false front, stemming right from that double heart.
So from that subtle poison of flattery, the psalm then shifts, doesn't it, to an even more overt, more arrogant kind of speech, the kind that dominates and oppresses.
Precisely. Calvin makes a distinction here. He talks about the tongue that speaketh great or proud things. He says these aren't just your average flatterers, the mean, conceited persons among the common people. No. David is focused on a much more dangerous type. Those who proudly boast of what they will accomplish and mingle base effrontery and threatening with their deceitful arts.
So powerful people using words to threaten and deceive.
Yes, he describes them as great calumniators of the court, people who lied divinely in boasting of themselves, and they used big and haughty discourse to just overwhelm the poor and simple. These are powerful figures twisting truth for their own gain, using words not just to trick people, but to intimidate them, to control them.
And their sheer audacity as well, it's chilling. It's right there in their declaration. We will be strengthened by our tongues. Our lips are in our own power, who is Lord over us. Calvin sees this as the absolute peak of wickedness.
The utmost height, he calls it.
Right. They aren't just defying human authority. They are effectively openly declaring war against God himself. They actually believe their falsehoods, their rhetoric, their manipulation gives them enough strength to overthrow all law and equity. It's like they think they are sovereign over truth itself, accountable to nobody, not even God.
It's a breathtaking arrogance.
It really is. It's not just human pride. It's a full-on rebellion against the divine order.
And David's personal experience here is so important for understanding just how deep this verbal malice goes. He finds these envenomed tongues, these calumnies. He says they are more deadly than swords and all other kind of weapons.
More deadly than swords. That's intense.
It is. He suffered far more injury, more agony from these deceptive, arrogant words than he ever did from any physical attack. It really highlights how destructive verbal wickedness can be. It shreds reputations, sows discord, breaks spirits. It can dismantle society in ways that physical violence sometimes can't. It's a vivid picture of the sheer ruin a corrupted tongue can cause.
Okay, so broadening the picture now. Beyond just these individual interactions, this pervasive moral decay, it naturally leads to widespread oppression across the whole society.
Indeed, the moral decay shows up directly in the spoiling of the needy and the groaning of the poor. We hear about injuries, the extortions, and the devastations inflicted by the ungodly. These wicked people don't just talk deceitfully, they act on it. They hold the poor entangled in their snares as a prey.
Like trapped animals.
Exactly. And the scale of the problem is huge. The ungodly possess the whole land and range about through every part of it. This leads to humanity being shamefully and basely oppressed by their tyranny. And Calvin notes, this corruption often starts right at the top, from princes, and then it infects the whole people. The result, the worthless and the refuse of men end up being exalted, put in positions of authority.
It just makes everything worse.
Right. This elevation of the base and corrupt, it not only ramps up the oppression, but also brings more dishonor on humanity, on the very idea of justice. It means the very people who should be leading and protecting are instead the source of the deepest wounds.
And it's really vital to recognize, as Calvin stresses, the internal nature of this corruption. This wasn't just happening among, say, foreign nations or outside enemies.
That's such a key point. And it makes David's lament even sharper and more painful. This deluge of iniquity, as Calvin calls it, it prevailed in the church of God. Righteousness was utterly overthrown among the chosen people of God.
Within the covenant community itself.
Yes, it was inside the very community God had called to be a light. It affected almost the whole body of the people. The context here is really significant. Calvin suggests the situation was likely during Saul's persecution of David. That was a time when all, from the highest to the lowest, had conspired to destroy an innocent and an afflicted man.
So it wasn't just external attack, it was betrayal from within.
A profound betrayal, a moral collapse of the very people who carried God's name. The enemy wasn't just outside the gates, they were in the heart of the community.
This overwhelming level of corruption where there's just seemingly no human help left. It leads David to feel like there's nothing around us but black despair. This total lack of human aid, this complete desolation, it forces him, as Calvin says, to betake ourselves to God.
This feels like a crucial turning point in David's experience, right? He's run out of other options. It absolutely is. And Calvin draws a very relevant parallel for us, for you listening. He says that believers today shouldn't be unduly discouraged at the melancholy sight of a very corrupt and confused state of the world. Instead, we should bear it patiently.
Easier said than done sometimes.
Oh, definitely. But his point is that our condition is strikingly similar to David's back then. When human uprightness, justice, truth, when they fail completely, when all the avenues of human help are just blocked, we are left with only one real option.
To turn to God.
To turn to God. It's not just a nice suggestion, it's a necessity born from the complete absence of any other viable source of hope. When everything around you seems to be collapsing and human institutions are broken, your only direction left is upward.
Okay, so after painting this truly devastating picture of societal ruin, David shifts. He moves from just lamenting to these urgent cries for help. He's not just observing the decay anymore. He's actively calling on God for speedy relief, for succor. This isn't just description now. It's a desperate prayer, an active appeal for God to step in.
And David's requests are quite specific. He asks for God to arise and intervene in this great confusion in the world. He cries out, "Save me, O Jehovah."
It's direct.
Very direct, not passive at all. It's a gut-level appeal for rescue from this overwhelming tide of wickedness, a call for the sovereign Lord to step into human history and make things right. He recognizes that only divine action can possibly reverse corruption this deep.
And he wants God to set in safety him whom he snareth. That phrase, it seems to suggest more than just rescue, doesn't it?
It does.
It sounds like a desire for, well, full restitution for the oppressed, restoration to safety for those caught in their enemies' traps. It's a desire for God to completely reverse the injustice, not just pull someone out of danger, but put them back in a place of security, wholeness. It's a prayer for comprehensive justice, really, not just escape.
That's a great way to put it. And David also pleads that God will keep them, thou wilt preserve him from this generation forever. Calvin sees this as David voicing his deep confidence in God's guardianship. It's a certainty that God will indeed protect his own, even when they seem totally surrounded, overwhelmed by this hostile, corrupt world. It's a declaration that God's watchful care is constant, ongoing.
He also calls for God to cut off all flattering lips and the tongue that speaketh great or proud things. This isn't just like asking for punishment, is it? It feels more like a plea for the very source of the societal plague.
Yeah.
The falsehood, the calumny to be removed.
Exactly.
It echoes David's own experience, like we talked about, where he found these words more deadly than swords. His cry here is for the eradication of the moral disease that so deeply infected his people. A yearning for truth to be the norm again, instead of deceit.
And this plea for God's action, it naturally brings up a crucial point that Calvin deals with, God's timing. When does God intervene? Because it might seem to us like God delays, like he's slow to act.
Yeah, that's a common feeling.
Right. But Calvin explains that God's delay isn't inaction. It's not indifference either. He clarifies that God is awakened by the calamities and the cries of his people. Now, this doesn't mean God was literally asleep or unaware. Rather, it implies a moment of divine readiness, an opportune time in God's sovereign plan when his righteous anger is fully stirred and he's poised to act decisively. There's a period of what looks like inactivity, but it's actually a prelude to his intervention.
So this means, as Calvin interprets it, that God often intervenes right at the point of peak suffering. It's when the injuries, the extortions, and the devastations leave us nothing but tears and groans.
Mm.
It's precisely then that the time is at hand when God intends to rise up to execute judgment.
Mm.
It suggests that human despair, the very moment when all human hope seems gone, becomes the ideal stage for divine action. It really highlights God's particular concern for the afflicted. He steps in when their need is greatest, when their cries are loudest.
And Calvin really emphasizes this truth. The greater the confusion of things in the world is, God is so much the readier to aid and succor his people, and that it is then the most proper season for him to interpose his assistance. That's quite a paradox for our human way of seeing things, isn't it?
It really is. When things look their absolute worst, when society seems like total chaos.
That's when God is nearest, most prepared to act. This insight is meant to really strengthen the faith of believers, to remind them that even in the darkest hours, God's intervention isn't far off. It's a doctrine designed to support faith during overwhelming trials. It suggests that the very depth of human brokenness can actually trigger the clearest displays of divine power.
Which then naturally calls for patience from us. When God's guardianship is sometimes hidden, as Calvin puts it, when his actions aren't immediately visible in their effects, the faithful are urged to wait in patience until he arrives.
Right.
And this isn't a passive, hopeless waiting, is it? It's more like an active trust, a steadfast endurance that acknowledges God is at work even when his hand isn't immediately obvious.
Mm-hmm. It means recognizing that God operates on a different timetable, with a different perspective than we often have.
Okay, this brings us to a really crucial turning point in Psalm 12. It's a significant shift, moving from David's lament and the description of human suffering to God's direct response, a divine declaration that changes everything.
And what a declaration it is. God himself speaks. He states with authority, quote, "Because of the spoiling of the needy, because of the groaning of the poor, I will now arise," Jehovah will say. "I will set in safety him whom he snareth."
Wow. Not a prophet speaking for God, but God himself.
Exactly. God himself addressing the chaos directly, personally. It's a powerful, direct assurance of his intervention.
And that adverb "now" in the declaration, it seems to carry a lot of weight. It highlights that God is awakened, as Calvin said, by the calamities, by the cries of his people. And he's choosing this precise, divinely opportune moment to act.
Yes. It doesn't mean instant gratification for our human timelines, maybe, but rather a divinely chosen, fitting moment in his sovereign plan. It signals a shift from that patient waiting to active divine movement.
Right.
And this declaration, it signifies God's direct personal commitment. He's going to grant full restitution, restore to safety those who are unjustly oppressed. It's a promise that the victims won't just be rescued from their current situation, but they'll also be made whole. They'll receive back what was taken, be reestablished in security. It goes way beyond just rescue. It speaks to a restoration of justice and order.
And immediately after this powerful statement, the psalmist introduces this central illustration about God's declarations, a really striking simile meant to help us grasp the nature of divine truth.
It truly is striking. The simile says, "The words of Jehovah are pure words. Silver melted in an excellent crucible of earth, purified 7 times." It's such a powerful image of refinement, of absolute integrity.
Okay, break down the meaning for us. What does this comparison really tell us about God's words, especially when we contrast them with the deceitful human words we were just talking about?
Well, this comparison underscores that God's words are absolutely reliable, truthful, and free from any deceit or impurity. Think about refining silver. You put it in the crucible, subject it to intense fire, and all the dross, all the impurities, they get burned away. What's left is pure, shining metal. That's the image here. God's words aren't mixed with any human flaw, any hidden agenda, any potential for deception. They are as pure as that precious metal, untainted, utterly trustworthy. A stark contrast to the double hearts and flattering lips operating in David's world. They are inherently true.
And what about the 7 times purification part? What does that signify beyond just being, really pure?
The 7 times isn't just about quantity. In biblical numbering, 7 often signifies perfection, completeness. So it means God's words are perfectly pure, completely free from dross or deceit. They've been thoroughly tested, proven to be without any flaw. Unlike human words, which are so often full of flattery, duplicity, hypocrisy, God's words are fully refined. They stand as the very embodiment of truth. There's no hidden meaning, no underlying deception, no possibility of error in them.
So it really highlights that God promises nothing in vain or for the purpose of disappointing man. Whatever he promises in word, he will perform in deed. God neither can deceive nor lie. This really sets his word apart from all human speech. And it's foundational to so much of Reformed theology, isn't it? It speaks to God's very nature.
It absolutely does. And this concept of pure words, it then serves as an essential foundation for our faith, for our hope. David, through this description, is really celebrating God's faithfulness, his steady character in performing what he has promised. This description is meant to uphold the faith and hope of the godly, especially during times of distress or when there seem to be delays in God acting. It's a necessary truth to hang on to when circumstances seem to contradict God's spoken word.
Because it directly counters our human tendencies, right?
Yeah.
We're so quick to call in question his fidelity to his promises and murmur just as if he deceived us when we don't see immediate results or when things get tough.
Precisely. When doubt starts to creep in, when the weight of the world makes us question if God is really paying attention, the understanding that the words of the Lord are pure acts like a shield. It cuts off the occasion of our distrust, as Calvin puts it. It serves as this constant anchor, reminding us that our perception of delay or difficulty doesn't negate God's truthfulness or his perfect timing. It guards our hearts against unbelief. It reassures us that God's word stands firm, regardless of our fleeting circumstances.
In this analogy, this picture of refined silver, Calvin admits it's far below the dignity and excellence of God's word itself.
Yes, he acknowledges that.
But he says it's very well adapted to the measure of our limited and imperfect understanding. It helps us appreciate its inestimable value. It makes something almost incomprehensible, the sheer truth and purity of God's word, a bit more tangible for our human minds.
That's a good way to summarize it. It brings it down to earth for us.
Okay, so moving from the purity and certainty of God's promises, let's transition now to their practical impact on believers. What does this actually mean for God's people in their daily lives, especially living in a world still, mired in corruption?
Well, it brings a firm assurance of God's guaranteed safety and preservation for his people. David, filled with this deep trust, he boasts of the certain safety of all the godly. Why? Because God, who neither can deceive nor lie, avows himself to be their guardian.
So it's more than just a hopeful wish.
Oh, much more. It's a confident declaration about God's protective nature, his active watchfulness over those who belong to him. It's a statement about God's character and his ongoing care for his own people.
And God's assurance is clear, almost like a direct echo of David's earlier plea. Thou, O Jehovah, will keep them. Thou wilt preserve him from this generation forever.
And you might notice there's a subtle shift in number there. It goes from them, the godly, to him, the singular.
Yeah, I noticed that. What does Calvin make of that?
Well, Calvin notes it could just be a common Hebrew way of speaking for stylistic reasons, but he also suggests it could point to the small number of good men left in that corrupt time.
Ah, okay.
The implication being that even if only one good man should be left alive in the world, yet he would be kept in perfect safety by the grace and protection of God.
That's an incredibly comforting thought, especially for anyone feeling isolated or outnumbered in a world where righteousness seems to be fading.
It really is. It means God's care isn't dependent on how large the faithful community is, but solely on his own unchanging character and promise.
And this brings us back to the concept of the corrupt generation that David mentions, coupled with this renewed call for patience from believers.
Right. This generation, as Calvin explains it, refers to the great multitude of ungodly persons and almost the whole body of the people living in the same age as David. This isn't just about a few bad apples. It really shows how pervasive the corruption was, even among God's chosen people, the Israelites.
It sounds like it was everywhere.
It was so widespread that David, kind of lamenting and reproaching them, almost lumps them all together. It signifies this deep-rooted unrighteousness, not just isolated incidents, a systemic problem right within the community God called his own.
And the phrase forever at the end of verse 7, that encourages believers to extend their confidence in God far into the future, right? Recognizing that God's help, his protection, will continue as long as the wickedness persists.
Exactly. This isn't a promise of a one-time rescue from some short-term problem. It's an assurance of ongoing, perpetual protection in a world that remains fallen.
It gives a long-term perspective.
It does, and this concept helps believers not get discouraged by the vast multitude of the ungodly. It helps us accept that the spiritual war is not prepared against us for a short time only, but that we must daily engage in the conflict.
That's a pretty realistic view of the Christian life in a fallen world.
It is. It prepares us for enduring opposition. It reminds us that our faith isn't just for the peaceful moments, but for the ongoing struggle against unrighteousness. It means maintaining a spiritual posture of readiness, knowing that the conflict is continuous.
So it really circles back to that counsel to wait in patience until he arise, especially when God's guardianship is sometimes hidden and is not manifest in its effects. What does it mean for God's hand not to be manifest in those moments? It sounds like we're called to an active faith, one that sees beyond the immediate circumstances, beyond the visible outcomes.
I think that's right. It means trusting in God's underlying governance even when the flood of calamities seems to be rising higher and higher all around us. Our faith isn't ultimately in what we can see, but in the unseen yet constant reality of God's rule and his pure word.
Okay, so to sort of recap our deep dive today into John Calvin's commentary on Psalm 12, we've really seen David's vivid portrayal of a society just consumed by moral decay, by injustice, a truly dire situation that drives him to cast all his hope entirely upon God. We've heard his direct plea to a sovereign God, and then, crucially, that steady declaration of God's word is perfectly pure, absolutely reliable, standing in such stark contrast to the deceitful words of humanity all around him.
Which leaves us with a rather compelling thought to consider, maybe. If the sheer prevalence of human deceit and wickedness is precisely what awakens God to act, as Calvin suggests, what does this tell us about our own prayers? And maybe about our perspective on his timing, especially in a world where truth still seems to be, well, struggling so openly. It leaves us perhaps with the powerful idea that the very depth of human brokenness might not be a sign of God's absence at all, but rather maybe it's an indicator that his righteous intervention, his arising, could be nearer than we perceive.
That's a challenging thought to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Calvin's commentary on Psalm 12. We really trust these insights resonate with you today wherever you're listening. Until next time, keep thinking reformed, keep seeking truth,